On January 13, 1974, in Houston's Rice Stadium, it was the destiny of the NFC champion Minnesota Vikings to meet one of pro football's greatest teams ever on one of its greatest days. Super Bowl VIII was a day of ultimate triumph for the Miami Dolphins and a day of aching frustration for the Minnesota Vikings. But even in defeat, there remain the warm memories of a spectacular season. A season of 19 victories and just 3 defeats. Most of all, a season in which the Minnesota Vikings proved that they were winners as they swept to the championship of the National Football Conference. For Coach Bud Grant and the Minnesota Vikings, the season opened on September 16th in Metropolitan Stadium. And following an undefeated preseason, the Vikings were ready for the always powerful Oakland Raiders. John Gilliam gave the Vikings an early 10-point lead. But Fran Tarkenton found himself trailing 16-10 late in the third quarter. Tight end Stu Voigt rolled the Vikings into scoring position. And one play later, Fran Tarkenton hit rookie Chuck Foreman, who twisted his way to the go-ahead touchdown. Old reliable Bill Brown added the clincher, and Minnesota wrapped up an impressive team victory 24-16. Week 2 found the Vikings in Chicago for the first of 3 consecutive Central Division battles. Against the Bears, Chuck Foreman literally burst to the front in the Rookie of the Year race, as time after time he found his way into the Chicago secondary. Chuck Foreman ran for 116 yards. Fran Tarkenton passed for the game's only touchdown. And Fred Cox kicked 5 field goals as the Vikings again came from behind to win 22-13. The returning heroes of the offense were welcomed home the following week. But against the defending Central champion Green Bay Packers, a different kind of game was in store. As one Packer said afterward, they just poured in on us. In a game decided by first downs instead of by touchdowns, the Vikings out-hit and out-kicked the Packers 11-3. Week 4 found the Vikings in Detroit, where 2 early errors by the Lions special team set up 2 touchdowns in the first 4.5 minutes, both on scoring passes to Ed Marinaro. The Vikings won their 4th straight, 23-9. Next, the Vikings put their undefeated streak on the line against the San Francisco 49ers, a team they had not beaten in their last 3 tries. John Gilliam again provided an early lead, but Steve Spurrier completed 31 passes, the most ever against the Vikings. And the outcome was in doubt until 2 crucial fourth-quarter interceptions by Paul Krause saved a 5th straight victory, 17-13. Back home for a 4-game stand, the Vikings next faced their old friend Roman Gabriel, now the leader of the surprisingly tough Philadelphia Eagles. Fran Tarkenton had the perfect antidote for any kind of trouble. Number 42, John Gilliam. Tarkenton connected on 16 of 21 passes, including 6 to John Gilliam, who totaled 160 yards and scored 2 touchdowns, as the Vikings offense hit its stride and outscored the Eagles 28-21 for a 6th consecutive win. Then came Week 7, and a battle of the Titans as the NFL's only unbeaten teams squared off against each other. The Los Angeles Rams had the league's top-rated offense, but the only touchdown of the game came on a short pass to Chuck Foreman. The rest was up to the Vikings defense, and they were magnificent. Leading 10-9 with time running out, Jeff Seaman blitzed John Hadle out of field goal range. And with their 7th consecutive win, the Vikings had equaled their victory total of the previous season and were the only undefeated team in the league. The always formidable Cleveland Browns were next for the Vikings, but no matter what the Browns tried, there was a Viking ready to turn the play around for Minnesota. The Viking defense held Cleveland to just 4 first downs and no touchdowns, while the offense provided 23 first downs and some of the year's most spectacular plays by Fran Tarkenton and Stu Voigt. Cleveland became Minnesota's 8th consecutive victim, 26-3. And the Vikings rolled on to Week 9 in the rematch with the revitalized and ravenously hungry Detroit Lions. Detroit scored first, but once again, weird special team play hurt the Lions and helped the Vikings. Wally Hilgenberg's touchdown put the Vikings ahead, and then the clock rolled back to the 60s as Fran Tarkenton handed off to Dave Osborne 14 times for 79 yards, and to the old bowling ball Bill Brown 18 times for 103 yards. Fran Tarkenton enjoyed another typically efficient afternoon as he hit on 11 of 15 passes, including another touchdown to John Gilliam. The offensive line devastated the Detroit defense, opening the way to the Vikings' 9th straight victory of the season and their 12th straight over the Lions, 28-7. Not only were the Vikings the lone undefeated team in the NFL, but after just 9 weeks, they had already clinched the Central Division title for the 5th time in the past 6 years. In Minnesota, he was Bob Lee. In Atlanta, he was General Robert M. Lee, and he was looking for an end to the Vikings' unbeaten streak and for a 6th consecutive win for the Falcons. The Vikings' winning streak finally ended in Atlanta, 20-14. The following week was the last home game of the regular season. Governor Anderson officially proclaimed it Carl Kasulke Day. The former Minnesota strong safety had been paralyzed from the chest down in a motorcycle crash the day before training camp opened, and now he was making his first public appearance since the accident. As John Gilliam said, I don't think we can ever do enough to repay him for what he's done for us. In the game itself, the Vikings rolled up 31 points against the Bears, of which 12 were scored by John Gilliam, who later presented the game ball to Carl Kasulke. The regular season ended with 12 wins and 2 losses, a record which tied for the best in the NFL. And one of the reasons for that record was Bud Grant's outstanding offensive line, anchored at left tackle by Captain Grady Alderman. At left guard was Ed White, the world's arm wrestling champion. At center was Mick Tingelhoff, a 7-time All-Pro who made himself one of the game's most celebrated free agents. Sharing right guard were John Henry Ward until he broke his leg, and number 64, veteran Milt Sunday. Ron Yeri was again an All-Pro and a major contributor to the health and welfare of Francis Asbury Tarkenton, who led the entire NFL in passing percentage and in fewest interceptions while directing a masterfully coordinated Minnesota offense. An offense which attacked the opposition with more than 2,000 yards in both rushing and passing. Among Tarkenton's receivers were 6 who averaged at least 1 catch per game. 3 of these were running backs. Oscar Reed, the multi-talented rookie Chuck Foreman, and the second-year man from the Ivy League, Ed Marinaro. At one wide receiver spot, Tarkenton could call on the experience of 14 pro seasons and former Green Bay Packer Carroll Dale. From the tight end position, Tarkenton could rely on Stu Voigt to make the key catch, no matter how heavy the traffic. When it came time for the big play, week after week, Tarkenton looked for and found Minnesota's Mr. Smooth, John Gilliam. John Gilliam scored 9 touchdowns and caught 42 passes for more than 900 yards as he led his team in receiving for the 5th straight year. And no matter who was at quarterback, Fran Tarkenton or his backup Bob Berry, the man to look for was John Gilliam. The running game achieved new heights in '73. Fran Tarkenton ran his career rushing total past 3,300 yards with a lifetime average of 6 yards a try. With Tarkenton in the backfield most of the year was the man they call the Seed, Oscar Reed, with a solid 4 yards per carry. And then there was number 44, Walter Eugene Chuck Foreman, the Vikings' first authentic breakaway back since the early years of Tommy Mason. Despite several nagging injuries, Foreman handled the ball more than 200 times for a total of almost 1,200 yards in total offense and was consensus NFC Rookie of the Year for 1973.
All right, let's huddle up. Come on, guys, let's get it going. All right, make sure you're onside. Don't let anybody offside. First man down there. We're riding a wild horse. Let's go now. I'll beat you to the tackle, Nate.
At age 35, Bill Brown was not just the oldest running back in the league, but as captain of the Vikings special teams, he was a rare blend of experience and enthusiasm. As Brown said, that retirement talk just makes me work that much harder. Bill Brown was an inspiration to the rest of the Vikings' excellent special teams, of which the more visible members were punter Mike Eischeid, an expert at moving the ball around for favorable field position, and Fred Cox, who passed the 1,000-point mark and became number 4 on the NFL's all-time scoring list. The Minnesota defense returned to good health in '73 as they gave up the fewest points in the NFC and the fewest touchdowns in the entire league, an average of less than 1 a game. The defensive secondary forced its share of turnovers, The most spectacular was by Terry Brown against the New York Giants. Terry Brown is an example of the quality depth which waits behind men like free safety Paul Krause, number 22, the NFL's leading active interceptor and third on the all-time list. And men like strong safety Jeff Wright, number 23, the third-year man from the University of Minnesota. And left cornerback Nate Wright, number 43, the other half of the Minnesota Vikings' own particular version of the Wright brothers. At right cornerback was Bobby Bryant, 170 pounds of true grit, and the NFC's leading interceptor for the year with 7. The Viking linebackers combined youth with savvy. On the outside, there was experience in 10-year veteran Wally Hilgenberg on one side and 12-year veteran Roy Winston on the other. In the middle, there was youth and a developing star in second-year man Jeff Seaman, number 50. At defensive tackle were perennial All-Pro Alan Page and strongman Gary Larson. At end were All-Pro Carl Eller and Captain Jim Marshall, the Iron Man. The fifth man was TV star Bob Lertzema. The Viking front four has been an inseparable unit since 1967, when Alan Page arrived from Notre Dame. All nicknames aside, the Viking front four is quite simply one of the best in pro football history and the foundation for one of the best defensive teams ever to play the game. December 22nd, 1973, the opening game of the NFL playoffs. Most of the Vikings had been there before, but two who had not been there were Fran Tarkenton and John Gilliam. In their first crucial game in 6 weeks, the Vikings were tight at the start, and they trailed the Washington Redskins 7-3 at the half. The man who finally got things going was Oscar Reed, who accounted for 171 yards running and receiving. As Reed said after the game, since early in the season, they've been keying on Chuck Foreman. I'm not the world's greatest pass catcher or runner, but given a little room, I'll use what I've got. Twice, Billy Kilmer put the Redskins ahead, but then Carl Eller told John Gilliam to shake it off, and with one kick, he blasted a blackboard to the floor. And in the second half, the Vikings twice came from behind to take the lead. While Metropolitan Stadium quivered with joy in the twilight, Fran Tarkenton performed still another of his miracles. Within 1 minute of the fourth quarter, Tarkenton found Gilliam twice for touchdowns. The Vikings won 27-20, and it was on to Dallas to play for the championship of the National Football Conference. Irving, Texas was not exactly friendly territory for Fran Tarkenton and the Vikings. But in his first championship game in 13 years of pro football, Tarkenton played the best game of his best season. His play selection and field generalship kept the Dallas Doomsday defense off balance throughout the game and enabled the Vikings to control the ball for almost the entire first half, which ended with Minnesota leading 10-0. In the third quarter, Mike Eischeid boomed a punt 58 yards from his own end zone. But a Dallas rookie named Golden Richards almost inspired the Cowboys to another championship. As a nation of pro football fans looked on, Fran Tarkenton showed the winner's touch. Just 3 plays after Dallas had scored, Tarkenton retreated and threw the ball just as far as he could. As he had done so often, John Gilliam scored the touchdown which broke the game open. Again, it was up to the defense, and the Purple Gang never looked better. The Cowboys tried everything in their playbook, but the Vikings just kept hammering the ball loose. Bobby Bryant's touchdown finished an almost perfect day for Minnesota. The Vikings won 27-10, not just because of Bryant and Gilliam and Tarkenton, but because 40 men had played a team sport about as well as it can be played. And that is how the Minnesota Vikings became champions of the National Football Conference.